Courtrooms are supposed to be where justice gets served, where people face what they've done and take responsibility. But there's a different breed of criminal who treats the whole thing like it's their personal reality show. We're not talking about someone who just made mistakes. We're talking about those who take lives and then have the audacity to smirk about it in court. They're the ones who stare down grieving families, roll their eyes at judges, and act like the whole thing is beneath them. The security cameras catch it all, every disrespectful gesture, every moment of pure disregard for human life. Here are some of the wildest courtroom moments of all time. Shawn Rker. In 2012, Shawn Rker had already spent a dozen years in prison for detonating pipe bombs in Utah. Freshly out, he got himself a family in Wisconsin, but he wasted no time in terrorizing them too. That year, he was arrested and charged with 16 crimes. Yes, 16 crimes. Some of them were as bad as SA and CA, accounts so gruesome they can't be described here. It was a relief to the whole family when this monster was finally taken away from their home. When he was brought for his courtroom hearing in March 2012, he was tied to a chair, tightly shackled, wore a spit mask, and was surrounded by 3 heavily armed guards. That's only because he'd attacked guards and tried to escape before. However, in his mind, he was the victim in that situation, and Judge Wayne Merrick was his enemy.
If I'm having you all killed.
He repeatedly threatened Judge Merrick, promising he would take his life, then his family's life for trying to send him back to prison. He even claimed he had the judge's home address, as well as the prosecutor's, and that he would punish them hard for, well, punishing him. That just goes to show how unwilling he was to face the consequences of his own actions.
Last month, Shawn Rker was in court for a pre-sentence hearing, threatened the judge, threatened the prosecutors, and because of previous behavior, he's going to be sentenced today via video conference.
Indeed, Rker had to be dragged out of the courtroom kicking and screaming, and returned for his sentencing through a computer screen. He just wouldn't stop cursing. He was sentenced to 7.5 years for damaging the Racine County Jail, and another 200 years for terrorizing his family. The judge made it clear he doesn't believe this is a man who can ever change. He is best kept locked up forever. Jeremy Christian. It doesn't get much worse than Jeremy Christian. When he saw the one victim he hadn't killed in court, his only words were regret for not taking her life too. In May 2017, Christian hopped on a train in Portland, Oregon with a cruel and hateful plan. He unalived Ricky John Best and Taliesin Namkai Meche, and he would have continued had he not been arrested within minutes. As soon as he boarded the train, Christian began by shouting racist slurs at 2 African-American teenagers. He was threatening to do horrible things to them, so other passengers stepped in to defend the girls. They confronted Christian and put a wall between him and the 2 teenagers, who made their way to the back of the train. But that only infuriated Christian more. When one of the passengers pushed him away, Christian pulled out a knife. He took 2 lives that day, the lives of 2 peaceful people who were trying to de-escalate a situation. One of them was a veteran. He almost took a 3rd life, 21-year-old Micah David Cole Fletcher, who barely survived the chilling ordeal. This all happened in 12 seconds, after which Christian ran out of the train onto the station, still holding on to the knife and threatening to take more lives. Christian ran from the train station, but other passengers weren't about to let him escape. Some dialed 911, while others chased him down, determined to make sure he faced justice. When the police caught up with him, Christian wasn't scared or sorry. Instead, he was acting wild, actually bragging about offing 2 people. And what happened next was even more disturbing. At his trial, Christian faced multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and hate crimes. But sitting there in court, he didn't show an ounce of regret. He kept positioning himself like he was ready to launch at someone, his hand gripping his leg, radiating threat and anger. Then came the hardest part, when survivors shared their stories. The moment one of the young teens he'd harassed on the train started speaking, Christian erupted, shouting at her, "Honestly, how does someone end up in this dehumanized state?" With that kind of behavior, there was zero chance of mercy. The judge hit him with 2 back-to-back life sentences, no chance of ever getting out. During the trial, everyone saw Christian's true colors. This wasn't some one-time explosion of violence. The evidence showed this was just who he was, day in and day out. The picture that emerged was dark, a person filled with violence and hate, targeting anyone who didn't look like him. His world was divided into 2 groups, white men and everyone else, and he made it his mission to spread fear and pain. The train station attack wasn't even his first violent crime. Just before that day, he'd already attacked a woman, proving this was all part of a pattern. Then he shouted racist slurs at the bus driver, threatening to unalive them.
It's like we got a Christian or Muslim bus driver. I'll you too.
His attack on that woman added another 25 years to his sentence. Not that it changed much. He was never getting out anyway. What could have actually meant something was if he'd shown even a hint of understanding what he'd done. Just a moment of seeing how wrong he was. But Christian was so deep in his hate that he couldn't or wouldn't see it. Try to point out his wrongs, and he'd just threaten you too. The one good thing is that he's locked away now, where he can't harm innocent people anymore. Maybe the biggest lesson here? His twisted beliefs and hate speech didn't just reveal who he was, they actually made his sentence worse. If he'd kept his hateful thoughts to himself, he might have gotten less time. Instead, he showed everyone exactly who he was, and paid the price, finding, as the jury did, that Christian committed his crimes based on unreasonable racial and religious biases. Judge Cheryl A. Albrecht on Wednesday sentenced Christian to 2 terms of life in prison, without possibility of parole. Christian, now 38, could have gotten a sentence that would have allowed for his release at age 70. Let that sink in. And remember Micah Fletcher, who survived Christian's knife. He was in the courtroom, testifying against Christian. As he did that, Christian stood up and told him he should apologize to the victims' families. That's right, he held Micah responsible for what he had done that day. Yep, zero remorse, humanity, or understanding of what happened. This was all on him. It's a reassuring thought that he'll rot in prison. Leonid Graser.
Тебе решение суда понятно?
This is Leonid Graser. He was just 18 when he killed his sister in December 2019. His reason? He claimed Satan had ordered him to do it. His sister Ariada was only 21. She died from multiple wounds, alone in their shared apartment. Her last moments were filled with terror and confusion, trying to understand why her own brother would turn on her like this. Police arrested Leonid right after, and his case went to the Shcherbinsky District Court in Moscow. People were already shocked by what he'd done to his sister, but what he did next in that courtroom left everyone stunned.
This practice is rarely seen today outside of Russia to prevent dangerous criminals from attacking or possibly even escaping, which is exactly what Graser's planning to do.
Russia is among the last countries to put their defendants in glass jail boxes. They are reserved for dangerous criminals who are considered at risk of escape. In Leonid's case, it couldn't be more true. He didn't waste a second sitting down or thinking about his actions. He just wanted out. Graser remained cold and defiant toward the authorities, almost like he was mocking them for not arresting him sooner. Then, this happened. With everyone panicking out loud, Leonid made a run through the ceiling slats with great determination. One officer tried opening the door to the jail box, but she soon realized it was locked, so a crazy struggle started. First, an officer hit him with the baton. Then, the other officer climbed over the jail box and tried to pull him down. Just pause and think how disturbed Leonid's mind must be if he really thinks he can escape. Even if he makes it out of the courtroom, where would he go next? The courthouse was filled with security cameras and guards. As the officer presses the button on the wall and calls for backup, the other officer has got a tight hold on Graser's leg. Meanwhile, his pants come off.
At this point, these Russian officers are not playing around.
Yeah, that's Leonid's voice. At this point, one officer was tasing him. Finally, the taser did it, and the last bit of the footage is almost hilarious. But there's nothing funny about what Graser did to his poor sister. He later pleaded guilty to the murder and said he had no regrets. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars in a cold, unforgiving prison in near total isolation. Randall Moore. Speaking of zero remorse, it doesn't get any more sickening than Randall Moore, who killed his wife, then blamed her for it.
And I'll tell you point blank, I have not 1 ounce of remorse for Therese Ann's death.
Therese Ann Lynch Moore wore many titles: veteran of 3 tours, mom, daughter, friend. She lived in West Des Moines, Iowa, raising her little boy Levi and building a life after service. Her ex-husband Randall Moore showed his true colors after they married. He started cutting her off from everyone who cared about her, trying to make her completely dependent on him. But Therese Ann saw the red flags in his controlling behavior and made the brave choice to leave. For guys like Randall, losing control is like lighting a match near gasoline. He wouldn't accept the breakup, just pushed harder to dominate her life. Therese Ann was so scared for herself and Levi that she got a restraining order on October 12, 2009. A month later, on Veterans Day, she should have been planning her 31st birthday celebration with Levi and her family. Instead, they received a message that turned their world dark. Randall had kidnapped Therese Ann, and he wasn't planning to let her live. He'd been stalking them for weeks before grabbing her from a mall parking lot. He took her to their old apartment. Soon, neighbors heard 2 gunshots and called 911. Officer Todd Rowland rushed to help, but Randall wasn't done spreading pain.
Okay, 303 Adams been hit, officer down.
Then, it was Randall himself who phoned 911. He explained that he had unalived his wife but didn't offer an apology. In fact, he told the dispatcher what he would also say in court, that it wasn't his fault that he was doing this.
I didn't want to do any of this.
Okay.
But I'm telling you, all I wanted was my son. I just wanted to see my 7-month-old baby. That's all I cared about.
Think about it. If Randall actually loved his son, how could he steal Levi's mom from him? When a child loses their mother, it leaves a wound that never fully heals. Levi had to grow up carrying a weight no kid should bear, knowing his own father killed his mom. In one single day, this young child lost his whole family. His mom was gone forever, and his dad would spend his life behind bars. What was going through Randall's mind? Did he really think he could hurt Levi's mom and still have a relationship with his son? But the drama wasn't over. Officer Rowland needed surgery on his hand after what Randall did. As soon as doctors cleared him to leave the hospital, he headed straight to court. He wasn't going to let anything stop him from testifying against Randall. It didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. Everyone could see the hate and arrogance on his face throughout the trial. He showed zero remorse and was mocking his wife's family. It would get even worse after the verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of kidnapping in the first degree. Guilty of sexual abuse in the first degree.
Yeah, this is the true horror that poor Therese Ann went through just before she died. Therese Ann's mother had to listen to it all. During the victim impact statements, she looked right at Randall and delivered some powerful words.
What you did to my daughter, Therese Ann Marie Lynch, was evil, hateful, and despicable. You are now dead and rotting and repulsive to me.
Moore then looked back at her and said,
Read the journal she wrote. She hated you.
Thank you, Judge.
She hated you. You're a loser.
This was Randall Moore's attitude throughout his entire trial. He showed no remorse or even the slightest emotion for taking the life of someone he claimed was the love of his life. How can you claim to love someone and do this to them? He had one last thing to say before he was dragged away.
And I'll tell you point blank, I have not 1 ounce of remorse for Therese Ann's death. It could have all been prevented. All you had to do is let me see my kid. Now you're never going to see her again.
Yeah, he literally blamed his own wife for trying to keep her son safe from him. He blamed the judge, the system, and everyone who stood in his way. This is a textbook psychopath, one who only thinks about himself and refuses to see reason even after he's done the unthinkable. The judge also had words for him before he saw him out.
If anybody didn't know what a piece of work you were before you start talking, they know it now.
Exactly. If Moore did anything for himself was show his true colors one last time.
The court doesn't allow me to punish you any more than I'm doing now. If I could, I would.
Randall Moore was thus sentenced to 3 life sentences plus 25 years. Today, Therese Ann's mother, Sheila, is pushing for an Iowa law that would require anyone ordered by a court to keep away from their victim to also wear a GPS tracking device. This way, the device could alert the victim and law enforcement officers if the offender was close to them. If Randall had been ordered to wear such a device, he would not have been able to stalk his ex-wife and son, let alone commit the atrocity he did.
Evil excuse for a man did unspeakable things to my daughter, and we got justice today. And Therese Ann was with us today, and she knows that no other woman and no child will ever be hurt by this man again. My daughter, Therese Ann Marie, is at peace, and now the family will be also.
And we should work harder to stop people like Randall Moore before they even get a chance to come up with such atrocities. When defendants explode in court, screaming threats and curses, They think they're showing strength or defiance. What they're really doing is proving everyone right about them. Every outburst, every taunt thrown at grieving families, every threat hurled at the judge. It's just confirmation that they belong exactly where they're heading, behind bars, permanently. These people often think they're making some kind of powerful statement. Instead, they're just showing everyone exactly who they are. Broken, hateful individuals who can't even fake basic human decency for a few hours in court.
I am gonna appoint the public defender for you.
That's horse. You do whatever the you want.
Excuse me?
My name is Mr. Greenman. I'm the federal witness.
Behind the headlines of America's most notorious crimes lies a disturbing irony, the staggering entitlement of society's most violent offenders. In courtrooms across the country, individuals who showed zero regard for human life, who tortured, killed, and destroyed families without hesitation, have thrown explosive tantrums when they felt disrespected by judges or prosecutors. These outbursts reveal something profound about criminal psychology. The deeper the evil, the more adamantly its perpetrators demand dignity they never gave their victims. When cornered or exposed, their carefully constructed facades crumble, revealing the true face underneath. Ted Bundy.
Look at the people they struck. Room that jury walks in. I'm not going through this, and you knew that, Your Honor. Sit down. You know how far you can push me.
Ted Bundy isn't just another serial killer from our parents' generation. He's someone who changed how we think about what a murderer looks like. While we often picture killers as obvious outcasts or clearly disturbed people, Bundy was the opposite. He was considered attractive, smart, and successful. He went to law school. He worked at a SE-side prevention hotline. He was, by all appearances, a normal guy living a normal life. Some people even pegged him for a good person. That's what made him so dangerous. Nobody knows exactly how many people he killed. He admitted to 30 murders before his execution, but investigators think the real number could be over 100. His murders happened across at least 7 states from 1974 to 1978, though some experts think he might have started killing when he was still a teenager. Here's what made Bundy next-level terrifying. He didn't hunt in dark alleys or sketchy neighborhoods. He attacked in broad daylight, often in busy public places like college campuses or beaches. His whole strategy relied on looking trustworthy. He'd pretend to be injured, wearing a fake cast or using crutches, and ask women to help him carry something to his car. His victims weren't people who took unnecessary risks. They were often educated, independent women who were just trying to help someone who seemed to need it. The way he got caught was almost random. After escaping from jail twice in Colorado, twice, he ended up in Florida where he attacked multiple women at a Florida State University sorority house. A police officer named David Lee spotted him driving a stolen car erratically and pulled him over. They found stolen credit cards and burglary tools in the car. It was only later that they connected him to the sorority house murders and the killing of a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach. The really disturbing part, his behavior after getting caught. In custody, Bundy acted like he was the main character in a TV show. During interviews, he'd switch between being super charming and intellectual, like he was at a job interview instead of being questioned for murder.
You feel that everything will turn out all right, that you are innocent. Do you still feel that?
Yeah, more than ever.
He would flirt with female interviewers and court staff, maintaining eye contact and trying to control every conversation. Even while facing multiple murder charges, he'd smile and joke around like he was some kind of celebrity.
I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old?
In court, it got even weirder. He sometimes acted as his own lawyer, showing off his legal knowledge while playing to the cameras like he was in a movie. Women would actually show up to his trials as fans, and he'd acknowledge them with winks and smiles, all while being tried for brutal murders. He acted like he was completely innocent, just a normal guy fighting against false accusations, but sometimes the mask would slip. When certain witnesses testified against him, especially ex-girlfriends or women who'd rejected him, you'd see the real Bundy. His eyes would change, his voice would get harsh, and his questions would become aggressive. Take his famous 1980 courtroom outburst.
Look at the people they struck. Room that jury walks in. I'm not going through this, and you knew that, Your Honor. Sit down. You know how far you can push me.
During his trial for murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, he lost it in court, twice in one day. The mask of the charming law student cracked, revealing the rage underneath. The first time, he suddenly stood up and tried to leave the courtroom, forcing guards to grab him. But it was his second outburst that really showed who he really was.
You want to make a circus? You've got a circus, and you'll have all rain on your parade, Jack. You'll see a thunderstorm. This will not be the packed little drama you arranged.
Bundy, sit down.
What triggered him? The jury selection process. It had taken 2 weeks and 150 potential jurors to find people who might be somewhat unbiased, but Bundy knew most people had heard about his other murder convictions. When he realized he couldn't charm his way out of this one, he completely snapped. This was the same man who'd spent years convincing everyone he was just a normal, well-adjusted guy. In these moments, everyone saw the real Ted Bundy, not the fake persona he'd created, but the angry, controlling killer underneath. In his final years on death row, Bundy gave interviews to investigators and authors. The way he talked about his crimes was deeply unsettling. He'd discuss the murders like he was a crime expert analyzing someone else's case, not like he was talking about his own actions. He could switch between being totally normal and completely detached from reality. Dale Roy Greenman.
Hello, Your Honor.
State your name.
Mr. Greenman.
Can you tell me your name?
Roy Greenman.
This is Dale Roy Greenman, arrested in Orlando, Florida for theft. Compared to Ted Bundy, Greenman's crime is almost unnoticeable. He'd stolen a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, and a Gatorade from a 7-Eleven. You might think his hearing would be as uneventful as his crime, and yet he threw a tantrum as if the stakes had never been higher, charged with petty theft and given a $250 bond.
So, Mr. Greenman, you have prior history out of state, and so the state may enhance this offense to a felony based on your prior. So I can't do anything with your case today. I am gonna appoint the public defender for you.
That's horse. You do whatever the you want.
Excuse me?
My name is Mr. Greenman. I'm the federal witness.
This was his reaction. It's funny how he demands respect but offers zero. Well, it's not actually funny. Imagine being a judge and having to deal with these pieces of work on a daily basis.
Let's get a Jeff Brown long up and figure out what you're
All right, he can be removed once y'all get him out.
What people like Dale don't realize is, one of these outbursts can actually worsen your charges by a lot.
I'm gonna set his bond at $1,000.
Dale Roy Greenman's bond was increased 4 times and put in jail. He was released on recognizance 1 week later, meaning he signed a document promising he would appear in court at a set date. To no one's surprise, he didn't show up, so a warrant was issued for his arrest. Scott Nelson. Also in Florida, Scott Nelson unalived a nanny named Jennifer Fulford. According to prosecutors, Nelson forced his way into a Winter Park home in September 2017. He tied up 56-year-old Jennifer Lynn Fulford and put her in the trunk of her own car. Then, he used an ATM to steal $300 from her account. Investigators say Nelson stabbed Jennifer several times in a vacant lot outside Orlando. Due to the accusation that Nelson took her life to cover up a robbery, prosecutors filed for the death penalty in the case. Both times that he appeared in court, he was cold, remorseless.
The penal system in America is a spectacular failure. Nothing works. But everyone that drives by a prison, they glance at it real quick and keep driving. They may shudder, oh, that's it, oh God, and thank God I'm not there.
State Attorney Kelly Hicks also spoke about Nelson after dealing with his case. She was shocked at how narcissistic he appeared. He refused to see the unspeakable crime he'd committed, and he did not view Jennifer as a person. Instead, he cried for himself over and over again, cursing the U.S. for mistreating him.
He is a man who believes he's been mistreated by the system, by everybody in his life. Jennifer Fulford died because this maniac wanted to air his grievances to the world.
Yep, this guy wanted to get arrested so he could complain to a wider audience.
They turned me into an animal. I've been beaten. I've been chained to beds for days at a rip. I've been locked in cells that are so stifling hot. I have flashbacks to this very day.
The jail, he says, turned him into an animal, but no animal takes a life for no reason. And no animal robs and kills, then complains about the cell conditions.
I've had cockroaches running over my body. I've been beaten. I've been raped. I've been everything in prison.
Yet you did something that will potentially put you in prison for the rest of your life or on death row.
I couldn't help it.
So it was all about the money then? All about the money.
Isn't everything?
Wow, I'm speechless. Things got even more callous after a fellow inmate testified that Nelson had problems with Muslim inmates. That's when he flew off the handle.
Mr. Nelson, are we clear that you're going to stop talking? I need a verbal affirmative. Yes. Talk with your attorneys, and then your attorneys. I'm going to, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson.
Scott Nelson took a moment to relax, then spoke to his attorney. His conclusion, he wanted the death penalty, but even now he didn't get what he wanted. He was sentenced to life without parole.
I really think there were two goals. One, to get locked up, and the second goal was just to have a moment where people have to listen to him.
Yeah, well, and he also wanted to blame the world, right? I think that was his mission.
Imagine the type of person he was, where everyone he knew or loved could not listen to him anymore. That's what he felt he needed to do in order to force a bunch of new people to listen to him rant. The world will be a better place with this monster off the streets. Antonio Rosales. And here's Antonio Rosales, also in Florida. This horrible human being was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and SA of a 10-year-old girl. He quite literally dragged her off the street and drove her into the woods, where he committed unspeakable crimes against her. He wanted to take her life, too. Just like Scott Nelson, he didn't want any witnesses. Luckily, the girl escaped and lived to tell the tale. Once arrested, Antonio Rosales was uncovered as a drifter with a very violent past. He appeared in court along with a translator, and things got out of hand pretty fast. The court documents would show the outrageous reason for Rosales' outburst. Apparently, he was insulted after being called a child molester. There's a bitter irony in how some of society's most violent offenders demand a level of dignity they never afforded their victims. Men who have committed unspeakable acts of violence, who have ended lives without hesitation or destroyed childhoods without remorse, will suddenly become indignant in courtrooms when they feel disrespected. It's a startling display of psychological compartmentalization. You see it in their outbursts. The more directly they're confronted with the reality of their actions, the more aggressively they reject it, often through displays of childlike petulance that would be almost comical if the context weren't so tragic. Each tantrum serves as a stark reminder of their profound disconnect from the gravity of their own actions. Rosales kicked and screamed until he was dragged out of the courtroom by multiple armed guards. As always, this behavior did not pan out in his favor. The following day, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 3 life sentences. Charles Manson. Charles Manson never actually killed anyone with his own hands, and that's what makes his story even more disturbing. Instead, he created something far more dangerous, a cult of devoted followers who would cull for him without question. Manson wasn't just a murderer, he was someone who could get inside people's heads and turn them into murderers. Growing up, Manson spent most of his early life in and out of juvenile detention centers and prisons, but when he got out in 1967, he landed in San Francisco during the peak of the hippie movement. He saw an opportunity, thousands of young people searching for meaning, many from good families who were rejecting traditional society. Manson, then in his mid-30s, positioned himself as a guru and spiritual leader. The group he formed became known as the Manson family. Most of his followers were young women from middle-class backgrounds, though he attracted some men too. They lived together in Spahn Ranch, an abandoned movie set outside Los Angeles. This is where Manson's true manipulation began. He used a combination of LSD, sleep deprivation, isolation, and constant preaching about an upcoming race war he called Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles song, to break down his followers' sense of reality. What made Manson particularly dangerous was his ability to convince others that murder was not only justified, but necessary. He told his followers that they needed to start this race war by committing murders that would be blamed on Black Americans. The violence would then spread, and in the chaos, Manson claimed, his family would emerge as leaders of the new world. The murders that followed were brutal. On August 9th, 1969, Manson sent 4 of his followers to a house in Beverly Hills. Their target was anyone they found there, but the main victim was Sharon Tate, a pregnant actress married to director Roman Polanski. Tate and 4 others were unalived in increasingly violent ways. The next night, Manson's followers killed Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in their home, writing messages in blood on the walls. What's crucial to understand is that Manson wasn't physically present for these murders. He sent his followers to do it, people who, months earlier, had been regular members of society. Somehow he was able to reshape these people's entire moral framework. When police finally caught up with the family, Manson's behavior became even more disturbing. In custody, and during his trial, he didn't act like someone trying to prove his innocence. Instead, he seemed to enjoy the attention, turning every court appearance and interview into a performance.
Do you feel blame? Are you mad? Do you feel like
He would make rambling speeches about society, stare intensely at witnesses to intimidate them, and break into random songs in the middle of questioning.
I wouldn't do anything that I felt guilty about.
You don't feel guilty at all?
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of.
His interviews became infamous. Manson would shift between seeming completely rational to suddenly erupting in threatening rants. He'd go from speaking quietly about love and environmentalism to screaming about murder and chaos. What made these interviews so unsettling was how quickly he could switch between these personalities.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
During his trial, Manson worked hard to maintain control over his followers. Even from jail, he and his female followers would often break into songs in court, interrupting proceedings. They shaved their heads when he did. The really chilling part about Manson was that he never showed real remorse. In fact, in interviews spanning decades after his conviction, he often seemed proud of what he'd done. He'd speak about the murders as if they were some kind of revolutionary act, not brutal killings of innocent people.
Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something.
When asked directly about the deaths, he'd often respond with philosophical ramblings or threatening outbursts, never taking direct responsibility, but never exactly denying his role either. During his 1970 trial, Manson repeatedly interrupted proceedings with outbursts, including lunging at the judge with a pencil. This behavior continued until his death in prison in 2017. Even decades after the murders, he could still switch between being eerily charming and explosively threatening, showing that his act wasn't really an act at all. It was who he truly was. Hey, thanks for watching. Do you know other famous courtroom outbursts? What punishment should this behavior add for a defendant? Leave a comment down below and make sure you like and subscribe before you go. All right, catch you soon.